Hello, so today I was watching a video from Cody Sanchez, and it basically says that AI will be displacing everybody in the, who've got jobs basically, right? Because machines will be taking over. Now, I want to kind of counteract some of these points that she's making because I think some of them are absolutely ludicrous. For example, the idea of having AI data centers in space is just preposterous, right? Let's think about this for a second. You don't have air in space, it's a vacuum. Yeah. So when I hear some of these billionaires saying that, well, we're going to put AI data centers in space, shut up, basically, is what I'm going to be saying, because there's a problem which there's a YouTuber called, I think her name is Anastasia in Tech. She's very, very good. She's a chip designer. I myself am a software engineer. But essentially, what I'm saying is, when we look at it from the hardware level, if you're launching a satellite up into space, right, you don't have air. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if a GPU or a TPU or a Thales device, Cerebrus, whatever device fails, that's running the inference for the processing of the data fails up in space, what are you going to do then? So we'll debunk that and say that that's just rubbish, right? Absolute garbage. So that's one, right? Because of the heat, right? Because of heat, this causes a massive problem, okay? So that's completely out of the question. There was another one where she mentioned that, everything that you learned will then be, displaced by the machine. Therefore, we'll raise up electricity costs by 6.7 to 12% within 2028 because we're now using more electricity to power on these data centers. Okay. My counter argument to that is, well, what if we don't pay the bill, right? If we're having 258% increases in electricity bills, which we've seen due to conflicts and wars, right? Be it Gulfstream or not, right? What happens then? Oh, sorry, we're just going to increase your bill, right? But then apparently that creates an underclass. Well, if the majority of the people are being displaced anyway, isn't everybody underclass? And this leads me on to my next thing that I think just really annoys me, right? If you have everything that is a machine, right, and you create your content arbitrage system based upon AI, right, which gives you the research and gives you all of that functionality, right, then doesn't that lead into more human-centric businesses being created? I mean, it would, wouldn't it? I mean, when I think about it, you're going to end up with more video content editors, you're going to end up with more PTs, you're going to end up with more people doing holistic medicine, Ayurvedic medicine. You're going to end up with more people doing that sort of stuff. And guess what will happen? They won't buy from machines. Humans aren't inherently designed to buy from machines. They may be tricked into buying from a machine, but they're not going to buy from a machine inherently. I mean, look what's going on the internet at the moment, right? 2 sticks of RAM cost $900 because of this meme. And it's usually a cat video. So I'm so sick and tired of these billionaires trying to tell me, right, oh, this is the next thing since sliced bread. And I keep telling them it's not. Right? Working in the software industry, they say, oh, well, it creates code better than, 67% of programmers. No, it doesn't. Absolute nonsense. I've done some of the coding via Claude, and I can tell you it's atrocious. Half the time, it doesn't actually work. Right? And how do I know that? Put it through a linter. Put it through any linter, any decent linter, and you'll see the amount of errors that it comes up. Sometimes, some of the Docker containers that it uses in the Docker file, right, have high vulnerabilities. And you're telling me that this system made 500 different PRs to open source projects, to only which 45% of them were accepted, when it can't even get the bloody basic Docker container from correction correct. No. No, this is a lie. This is a complete lie, right? So please do not get stuck into this BS rhetoric that people seem to have. That, it's the next thing since sliced bread. No, it is the next thing since sliced bread only if you understand the fundamentals of how to use it. And I will say that, and I will defend it to the core. Because, let's be honest, it's a machine to interpret ideas. It doesn't understand the fundamental nature of the idea which you have as a human. And it never will. You can train it on as many tokens as you want, it still won't get it right. Fundamentally. Yes, you can train the data set, you can increase the amount of tokens which are in there, you can increase the tensors, you can increase all of that good stuff, right? And by tensors, I mean this is a mathematical model, which is a matrix of mathematics. Essentially, this is a way in which you take unstructured data through NLP, which is natural language processing, and then create structured data from it, right? So if you think of a tensor, it's just a mathematical construct, and that's just representations of numbers, essentially. But we are going to reach a point where that just doesn't matter, right? Because fundamentally, we have a transformer underneath. Now, what is a transformer? Well, this is basically a way in which we train artificial intelligence. It's a model which allows us to use neural networks in order for it to blossom, essentially. So it's learning arbitrarily. But I want to say one other thing as well about the power problem. The one thing that I realized when building out AI data centers is that it requires significant investment. And we see this through different companies, right? There's one in particular that many know called OpenAI, which has $600 billion of investment currently in AI data centers plus. And it makes me think that there's a lot of junior developers out there, a lot of developers out there at the moment, which is getting so caught into this rhetoric BS that AI is going to be displacing all the jobs. It isn't. Yeah, it's just not. Let's just be fundamentally clear about that. Because when you think about it, even with AI, right, you're still going to need software engineers to understand the AI, to understand the data science, to understand the fundamental logics behind it. Because even if you're a sentient AI, you're still going to break somewhere, be it within the hardware or the software stack. It's true. Right? You can have AI data centers in space. If there's nobody there to go and amend them, where are you going to go? Down the road? Like this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous, right? And the thing that's really interesting is that when they announce layoffs, these companies, the stock price goes up. Well, hang on a minute. That's both institutional traders and retail investors which are affected. So if everybody's getting laid off, as they say it is, and then somehow we're creating an underclass, I think everybody's just going to invest in the stocks. They're going to invest in the S&P 500 because it's a return on infinite number of investment. The thing will just go astronomically high in terms of price. So I'm sorry, Cody Sanchez, I don't buy anything that you're saying. I think you're just full of garbage. I'm sorry. Like, prove me wrong. Right? Prove me wrong from a hardware perspective, prove me wrong from an economical perspective, and prove me wrong from a hardware perspective. Right? Because as far as I'm concerned, this is a bubble. Pure and simple. There are just too many attritions that make AI fundamentally untenable. Untenable. Think about it this way, right? If you're building up so many data centers in order to do training and inference, right? You are spending as much as a small country in order to do so in terms of GDP. Yeah, gross domestic profit. So that's the total acquisition of wealth within the country, right? GDP, gross domestic profit. And we see this particular investment whereby people like SoftBank are having to ditch some of the shares within stable companies like Nvidia, right? Actually, no, we'll get back to that. That's not necessarily stable, but they were stable at one point, right? Because they've already made the initial investment. They're retrieving some of that profit and saying, right, actually, we want to invest into OpenAI, right? Fair enough. But what I'm saying is that some of the other investments which they have, for example, in ARM, right, are now being attributed to OpenAI, which is funny because just the other day we saw Anthropic retaliate against the US defense, right? So the US defense people. I'm not sure what it's called in the US. I know in the UK it's MOD. I forget. Or maybe it's the Pentagon, which they have over there. I'm not sure. But we saw them retaliate and basically say, no, we're not using our AI for learning on defensive or offensive tactics, and we're not giving it away for those particular reasons whereby it can harm somebody. OpenAI said the same thing and managed to get the contract. Anthropic's usage went up exponentially as a result. So there is just some weird politics at play here. And yeah, I don't stand for this. I don't think much of the public does. And it leads me to believe that there are just certain things which are being hidden from the public, and I'm not particularly happy about them. And I think it's not about your CV, it's not about, the level of knowledge that you have if you're a developer watching this. It's literally because of AI circular financing, right? Because if you think about it, right, if you become an underclass because you don't have an income or whatever, right, kind of in the position which I'm at the moment, there's a problem which happens here, right, which is that the unemployment figures go up exponentially as a result of AI displacement, right, which is not the reason why you're being displaced, by the way. You also get knock-on effects of inflation. You get knock-on effects of energy costs going up. So you end up in this kind of trifecta state, right, which will be reflected in the bond market, reflected inside of all the other attributes which are necessary for the stock to survive, right? And then you're telling me that I have to pay your bill for electrics and stuff like that. No. We're going to end up seeing more people not paying it. So what happens then? Well, if you can't pay for it, it's going to be defaulted. This is why we're seeing things like 100-year bonds on certain companies like Google. Right? Because they can't pay for it. And we've seen this before with certain other companies. We've seen this before with other companies which issued 100-year bonds. And you know what happened to those companies? They're no longer relevant. They exist, but they're no longer relevant. So all this stuff is just, I'm trying very hard not to swear, but I'm going to call it BS. It's just BS, right? There is like, think about it. Like, why would I need, if it's so good, right? Which in a lot of like AI, I think I'm going to be clear. I think AI itself is a very, very good technology. I just don't like the way that it's being shoved down our throats and being, and the AI economics. I don't like that either. And I don't like the way that some of these people are interpreting AI in itself, right? It's much more complex than saying, oh, it's going to take over your jobs. No. There's a lot of neuroscience, there's a lot of psychology, there's a lot of different topics that have to be put into the data set of the AI in order for it to work. In fact, there's a YouTuber right now who did RDMA, right? So that's remote direct memory access. And what that means is it bypasses the TCP/IP stack, right? Which is transmission control protocol over internet protocol, which basically means, right? Instead of being slowed down, right, you get direct access to the memory within each machine. Think of it as kind of going from, a dirt road into the motorway. And it's similar in terms of performance. Right? Similar-ish. Right? So what that means is that they got really, really strong links in terms of network speed, and they ran 8 of these NVIDIA DGX systems, right? With variants, of course, but essentially 8. Now, this particular person loaded about 200 to 300 billion parameters of a model like Qwen, for example, into their machines. So Qwen being the large language model, similar to that of ChatGPT, Claude, the ones which you and I are familiar with, right? And what we found was something very shocking, that within 8 of these particular machines, the scaling was nonlinear. The scaling was nonlinear. Not like all these people are saying, like Cody Sanchez, and saying that, oh, we're making all this code in there. No, you're spending more exponentially on each individual system that is being put inside of this data center. That is why it takes billions and billions of pounds or dollars or dinero or whatever you want to call it, right, to build them in the first place. Because at the end of the day, you need exponentially more computing power to make the AI run and work. Which leads us to another problem. Pollution. Both in terms of sound, noise, and pollutants which are coming from these data centers. In fact, it's affecting people at the moment where one of these particular data centers, which is notorious and related to a person called Musk, is affecting and increasing the number of cases of asthma and cancer because of carcinogenics and PM2 particles released from gas turbine power plant engines. Right? Not nuclear, gas turbines. And what's unbelievable about this is that we're getting deals for 10 gigawatts, 1 gigawatt, and all these exponential numbers in terms of power delivery that we don't even have in terms of the national infrastructure. And then somehow we as the public have to pay for this. To only get what? 20 more tokens per second in terms of generation? Like what is this? What is this? So yeah, I mean, I'm struggling to understand this. Yes, it's a great technology, don't get me wrong. And I'll make another video about, are we using AI wrong? But I just felt so strongly to make this video because there's just certain things that I think are being hidden from us, right? Because think about it this way, in order for them to make a profit, right, on AI, especially OpenAI, I think everybody in the US would have to use it. Even so. And Musk has been on record to say that AI needs to work for America, otherwise the US economy fails. Let that one sink in. There's a video out there of Elon Musk saying something very akin to this. I'm paraphrasing, but it's something very similar to what I'm saying. So if that doesn't shock people, I don't know what does. Because that, right there, shows you how big the bubble is. Right? And we've already lost 1 trillion in terms of the economy due to this circular financing and cooked up books. In fact, I'm sure a lot of these companies at the moment are cooking up these books. I'm sure they are, right? Because when you've got a debt of that much size inside of a country like the US, right? For another country to turn around and say, be it Hong Kong or whatever, right? To turn around and say, the numbers ain't mathing, suggests a serious problem. And I think it's all being swept under the carpet. I really do believe it's being swept under the carpet. I'm not saying AI is bad. What I'm saying is that AI management and the way that it's being put in terms of people's throats, right, in terms of shoved down our throats as consumers, is incredibly just out of touch. We're getting so many people who just don't understand how AI fundamentally works on a fundamental level, right? Saying just arbitration, just garbage, essentially. And I just want to make it clear that it isn't what they're saying it is. It really isn't. Just look at some of these YouTubers online and you'll get an idea as to what AI actually really is. It's a very fascinating technology, right? Requiring many disciplines, right? Both in psychology, statistics and mathematics, science, engineering, right? All these 5 different disciplines which have spanned over many centuries, right? And security as well. And we're condensing them down into what is essentially an imitation of the human brain, right? And I remember when I was young, right, talking about the human brain. Do you know how much processing power we needed for even 1% to 10% of the human brain? It was 1 million CPU cores, right? Now, I remember back when I was in university, there was an experiment which was done whereby they tried to create I think it was somewhere between 1 and 10% of the human brain in terms of neural activity. And they found out that they needed about 100,000, I think it was about 1 million CUDA cores or something like that, something in that range. Maybe it was 10,000, I don't remember exactly, but it was a lot of CUDA cores. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was closer to 1 million. It was closer to about 1 million, yeah, about 1 million, right? Because nowadays we already have, GPUs which can spit out 10,000 CUDA cores, right? And then the evolution was tensor processing units, so TPUs. Now, why is that important? Why are TPUs important to this conversation, right? Because what's happening now is that many of the manufacturers of AI are trying to limit the amount of energy usage, so that way AI data centers save money, but also put the models on the cards itself, which is what people like Thales are doing. And this is what the significant speed up is, right? When we get that much token generation per second. So that's another bubble indicator, by the way, when we have multiple